The dog wouldn't go into the garden after that summer, and I never worked out how to explain it to the vet. She was 3 years old. Border collie, the kind that needs a job or she'd choose the skirting boards. We'd moved out to the property specifically for her, or that's what I told people. Really, it was for me. I'd wanted the quiet my whole life, and never had the money for it until my aunt died and left me just enough for the deposit on a place 4 miles from the nearest anything. The thing with the dog started in July. I only connect it to July because that's when the hay was cut in the field behind us, and I remember the smell coming through the kitchen window while I was trying to figure out why she'd started sitting at the back door instead of going through it. Before that, she'd race out. You'd open the door a crack and she'd be a blur. After a certain night, she'd get to the threshold, put one paw down onto the step, and stop. She'd look out at the garden, and then look up at me, and then she'd sit. She wanted me to come with her. I didn't think much of it at first. Dogs get funny. I thought maybe she'd been stung, or a fox had frightened her, and I did what everybody does, which is decide on the least strange explanation and move on with my day. I should say I'm not an anxious person. My sister will tell you I'm the opposite, that I don't worry about things I should. So when I say the garden started to bother me too, understand that it took a while, and that I fought it. The garden was long, maybe 200 feet, and at the bottom of it there was an old stone wall, and then the field. Previous owner had let it go, so half of it was proper lawn, and the other half was this waist-high mess of grass and cow parsley we hadn't cleared yet. There was a shed down there we didn't use, padlocked, and we'd never found the key, and honestly I'd forgotten it was even locked. It just sat there being a shed. The first thing I actually noticed, as opposed to the dog noticing, was the grass. In the tall section, near the shed, there was a patch pressed flat. Not a big patch. Roughly the size of a person lying down, if I'm being honest. Though at the time, I told myself it was a deer. We got deer. They bed down in long grass and leave a flattened oval, and it's completely normal. But deer move. They bed somewhere different each time, or they should. This was the same patch. I know because after a week or so of the dog refusing the garden, I walked down there myself, in the middle of the day, feeling slightly stupid, and the flat patch was exactly where it had been. The grass around it had that fresh green color where it had been crushed and was trying to stand back up. It had been used more than once. I remember I stood there for a bit, and then I looked back up at the house. That's the detail that stays with me, and I didn't understand why it bothered me until later. From that flattened patch, you could see straight up, the length of the garden, and into the kitchen window. The angle was clean. Someone lying in that grass would have had a perfect view of me at the sink, or at the kettle, or at the back door letting the dog out. I want to be clear that I didn't panic. I told myself a story. The story was teenagers. Local kids came out here to drink. Everyone knew that. There were cans in the lane sometimes. Kids lie in fields. That's what fields are for. And it was a good story, and I believed it for about another 10 days. Right up until the morning, I found the tea. There was a mug in the tall grass. Down by the shed, close to the flattened patch. One of ours, a plain white one from a set of 6, and I hadn't been down there with a drink, and neither had my partner, who was working away 4 nights out of 7 that whole summer and could barely be persuaded to go into the garden, even to look at the sunset. The mug had a ring of dried tea in the bottom. It had been sitting out long enough to grow a little skin of dust on the inside. I stood in the kitchen and counted the mugs. 5. We had 5. I want to tell you I did something dramatic at that point, but I didn't. I washed the mug and put it back in the cupboard and made it 6 again, and I think I did that because making it 6 again meant nothing had happened. 6 mugs is a normal house. 5 mugs and one in the garden is a different kind of house, and I wasn't ready to live in the different kind. It was the dog that made me stop lying to myself. About a week after the mug, she woke me up at maybe 2 in the morning. Not barking. She didn't bark at it, ever, which I only understood the meaning of afterwards. She barked at the postman, at pigeons, at absolutely nothing at all, but never at this. She'd come up onto the bed, which she wasn't allowed to do, and she was pressed against me shaking and staring at the bedroom window. Our bedroom was at the back, overlooking the garden. I didn't get up straight away. I lay there and listened, and the house did its normal night things, the pipes and the settling, and then, underneath all of that, I heard the gate. We had a wooden gate in the stone wall at the bottom of the garden, connecting to the field, and it had a particular sound, a sort of dragging scrape, because it had dropped on its hinge and caught on the ground. You couldn't open it quietly. I'd been meaning to fix it. I heard it scrape open, and I heard it scrape shut. By the time I got to the window, there was nothing to see. Just the garden going grey-blue in the early light, and the tall grass down the far end, not moving because there wasn't any wind. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. Whoever went through that gate that night went through it towards the field, away from the house, which means they'd already been in the garden, on my side of the wall, for however long before I woke up. And the only reason I woke up at all was the dog. I called the police that morning, and a very kind officer came out and walked the garden with me and agreed that yes, someone had probably been coming onto the property, and no, there wasn't a great deal they could do about a flattened patch of grass and a clean mug. He suggested a motion light and a camera, which I bought that same afternoon in a state I'd describe as brisk rather than frightened. I still wasn't frightened. I was organized. Being organized is what I do, instead of being frightened. The camera is why I don't live there anymore. It was one of the cheap ones that only records when it detects movement, and for 4 nights it detected nothing but a cat and the tall grass in the wind once the weather turned. On the 5th night, it recorded 11 seconds of footage at 3:40 in the morning. I've thought a lot about whether to describe what's on it, and I've decided I'll only describe the part I understand. For the first 9 seconds there is just the garden, grainy and grey in the infrared, the flat patch, the shed. Then in the last 2 seconds, something at the very bottom of the frame, close to the shed, changes. I thought at first it was the padlocked shed door, that it had come open. It took me watching it maybe 30 times to realize the shed door was still shut, and that the thing that had moved was lower down and to the side of it, and that it was moving because it was standing up, slowly, from the flattened patch. Something that had been lying there the whole time the camera had been running. The whole time I'd been convincing myself the garden was empty, rising up out of the grass right where it had a clear view of my bedroom window. The footage ends before it finishes standing. Battery, or the motion detection cut out, I never established which. We were gone within the month. I never opened the shed. That's the part people always ask about, and I understand why, but I want you to understand something about being alone that far out. You don't investigate. Investigating is a thing people do in stories because there's a camera crew. When you are genuinely by yourself with 4 miles of dark between you and another human being, you do not go and open the locked shed. You get in the car. I found out later, from the estate agent when we were selling, that the previous owner had also left in a hurry. She wouldn't say why. She said it wasn't her place to put people off. And I've never known whether the flattened grass and the mug and the thing standing up in the dark had anything to do with the previous owner leaving, or whether it was just that the countryside has a way of leaving certain spaces open, certain doors that stay locked with the key long gone, certain patches of grass that stay flat no matter how long you wait for them to stand back up. The dog was fine, in the end. New house, small garden, right in the middle of a town. She races out into it, but sometimes she'll stop at the door and look back at me, and I still get up and go with her, every time, because I learned that summer that the dog knows the difference between an empty garden and a garden that is only pretending to be empty, and I have never once caught her being wrong. I drive for a living, which is the only reason I know how wrong that night was, because I've driven those lanes maybe 2,000 times, and I know exactly how they're supposed to behave. Rural deliveries, the last leg, the stuff the big vans won't do because the roads are too narrow and the drops are too far apart. I get the parcels for the farms and the cottages and the places that don't really have an address so much as a description. White gate after the second cattle grid, that sort of thing. I've done it 11 years. I like it. You're on your own, the radio's on, and after a while the map of it lives in your hands. That's the part I need you to get before I tell the rest. I know these roads. I know them the way you know the stairs in your own house, where you don't count them, your feet just do it. So when I say I turned onto a stretch that shouldn't have been there, I'm not telling you I got lost. I want to be clear about that, because the police were very interested in whether I'd got lost, and I hadn't, and I could tell they didn't believe me, and I stopped talking to them about it after a while. It was February, dark by 4:30, and I had one drop left, a farm out past the reservoir that I'd been to 100 times. There's a junction where the lane forks, and you take the left, and the left takes you down a hill and over a little humpback bridge, and then it's a straight run to the farm gate. Simple. I've taken that left in fog, in snow, at midnight, drunk on tiredness at the end of a double. My hands take it. That night my hands took the left, and the road at the bottom of the hill was wrong. There was no bridge. Instead, the lane kept going down, further than it should, and the hedges on both sides got higher, and it got, this is the part I struggle to say properly, it got narrower, in a way that felt deliberate. Like the road was funneling, and I remember thinking, quite calmly at first, that I must have taken a different fork, that I'd made a mistake, and I actually laughed at myself a little, out loud, in the cab. So I looked for somewhere to turn around, and there wasn't anywhere. Just the two hedges and the lane going down, and I kept driving because there was nothing else to do, and I told myself the road had to come out somewhere, all roads come out somewhere, and I put the radio up a bit for the company. The radio went to static about a minute later. I didn't think anything of it. You lose signal out there. It's normal. It's the single most normal thing that can happen to you on those roads. I switched it off. Then I noticed the field. There was a gap in the hedge on the right, a field gate, and beyond it, a field sloping up, and standing in the field, quite far back, there was a person, just standing, facing the road. It was too dark to see anything but the shape, and I only saw it for the second or two it took to pass the gate, and I thought, farmer, checking on sheep, none of my business. Except it's February, and it's gone 5 and it's pitch black, and there's no torch, no dog, no quad bike, nothing you'd have if you were a farmer with a legitimate reason to be standing in a field in the dark. Just the shape, facing me. The next gap in the hedge, maybe 30 seconds further down the lane, there was another one, standing the same way, facing the road. I want to be honest about my thinking here because I've gone over it so many times. My first thought wasn't fear. My first thought was that it was the same person, that somehow the lane had bent back on itself and I was passing the same field twice, and that's a completely mad thought, but it was less frightening than the alternative, so that's the one I had. I sped up. The third gap, there were 2 of them. I stopped telling myself stories after that. I put my foot down as much as you can on a lane that narrow, and the hedges were right up against the mirrors now, scraping them, and I had this feeling that the lane was still going down when by every reckoning I had, it should have leveled out, or come to the reservoir, or come to something. The reservoir's a big thing. You can't hide a reservoir. But there was no reservoir, and no bridge, and no farm gate, only the down and the hedges, and, every so often, a gap with someone standing in it, facing me, never moving, always too far back to see properly, and always, somehow, positioned so that I'd catch them just as my headlights swept past. Here's the detail that I've never been able to put down. They were getting closer to the gaps, not moving while I watched. I never once saw one move, but each one was a little nearer the road than the last. The first had been way up the field. By the time I'd passed 6 or 7 of them, they were standing right at the gate, right at the hedge line, close enough that if I'd stopped and wound the window down, I could have spoken to them. I did not stop. I did not wind the window down. I don't know how long it went on. My clock said the whole thing lasted about 4 minutes, but I'd swear it was half an hour. And I know that's just what fear does to time. But I'm telling you what it felt like. And then the lane just ended, not at a junction. It came out onto the main road, the proper A road, with the streetlights and the cat's eyes and a lorry going past too fast. And it came out at a spot I knew, a spot that was 6 miles from where I'd taken that left fork. 6 miles I could not possibly have driven in the time and in the direction I'd been going. I sat at that junction with my hazards on for a good 10 minutes. Then I did the delivery. Different route, the long way round, and the farm was exactly where it always is. And the woman signed for her parcel and asked if I was all right, because I suppose I looked it, and I said I was fine. Long day. I went back the next morning in the daylight, because I had to, because I couldn't stand not knowing. I drove to the fork, and I took the left. There's a bridge, humpback bridge, straight run to the farm, exactly the way it's always been, exactly the way my hands know it. There is no long lane going down. There are no high hedges. There is no field full of gates with people standing in them. It is a 2-minute stretch of completely ordinary road, and it has never been anything else. I still drive it. I don't have a choice, it's my job, and most days it's just a road. But I don't take that left after dark anymore. I go the long way round, the way I went that night to finish the drop. And it adds 20 minutes, and I've never once been able to explain to my boss why, and I've stopped trying. Because the thing I can't get past, the thing that's underneath all the rest of it, is that I know those roads. My hands know them. And that night, my hands took the left the way they always do, into a place that was waiting, and I think about all the times before that I took the left without looking, without a second thought, trusting the road, and I wonder how many times something was standing just back from the gate in the dark, and I simply drove past too fast to see. My gran used to say the countryside doesn't have neighbors, it has witnesses, and I never knew what she meant until I inherited her house and had to live among them. She'd been in that village 60 years. When she died, I was the only family left who wanted the place, so I took it, and I moved out from the city thinking I'd have peace and a garden and cheaper everything. And the first few weeks were exactly that. Lovely. People waved. The woman from the farm shop knew my gran and cried a bit when I introduced myself and gave me eggs. I thought, this is it. This is the good life. I've made the right choice. I'm going to try to tell this the way it happened, rather than the way it makes sense now. Because the whole horror of it, if it is horror, is how slow it was, and how reasonable everyone was, and how long it took me to see the shape of it. The first thing was that people knew things about me. Small things. The man at the pub knew I'd had a parcel delivered before I'd mentioned any parcel. The farm shop woman asked how my job interview had gone, the phone one, that I'd done in my own kitchen with the windows shut, that I'd told nobody about. And when I say they knew these things, they weren't sneaky about it. That's what threw me. They said them openly, warmly, the way you'd mention the weather, as if of course they knew, as if it would be stranger not to. And every time, I'd start to say something, and then I'd think, don't be paranoid, it's a small village, people talk, and I'd let it go. But I couldn't work out who they were talking to. That was the thing. In a village, you imagine there's a network, a gossip chain. Someone saw the delivery van and told someone. Fine. But the job interview was on the phone, in a closed room. So either someone had heard it, which meant someone was close enough to my house to hear, or I'd mentioned it to someone and forgotten, and I went round and round on that one for days, trying to remember if I'd told anyone, because remembering I'd told someone was so much better than the other thing. Then there was the business with the curtains. My Gran's house had these heavy curtains in every room, and I'd been meaning to take them down, modernize, let some light in. And I noticed, I'm an observant person, it's a curse, that whenever I opened a curtain that had been shut, someone would mention it. Not directly. The man next door but one, over the wall, said something like, "Nice to see the front room again. Your Gran always kept it dark." And I thought, all right, he can see the front room from his upstairs, fine. But then, the same kind of comment about the back bedroom, which does not face any other house, which faces the fields, which nobody can see into unless they are standing in the field looking up. I started keeping the curtains shut. I told myself it was for warmth. The turning point, the moment I stopped being able to tell myself the reasonable version, was the meeting. There's a village hall, and there's a residents' association, and I got a note through the door, handwritten, inviting me to the monthly meeting, and I thought, why not? Get involved. Meet people properly. So I went. It was a normal enough evening. Tea and biscuits, a discussion about the drainage on the green, someone complaining about speeding on the lane. And then, near the end, the chairwoman, lovely older lady, said they should welcome the newcomer, meaning me, and everyone smiled, and she said, and I remember this word for word, she said, "We do like to know our people are settling in. We keep an eye on our own out here. Your Gran understood that." And everyone nodded. And it should have been warm. It was meant as warm. But there was something in the phrase, "we keep an eye," and the way the whole room agreed with it at once, comfortably, like it was a known and settled thing, that made the tea go cold in my hands. Because I understood, sitting there, that they weren't speaking figuratively. That keeping an eye wasn't a kindness they offered. It was a thing they did, to everyone, all the time, and that my Gran, for 60 years, had been kept an eye on, and had understood that this was the arrangement, and had never told me, because you don't tell someone the water's strange when they've grown up drinking it. I tried to test it after that. I'm ashamed of some of what I did. I'd say things out loud in the empty house. Plans. Made-up plans, a made-up trip to see a made-up friend, and then I'd wait, and within a day or two somebody would ask me about it, about the trip that didn't exist, where I was going, when I'd be back, who I was seeing, and I'd stand there and lie about my own lie, and inside I'd be screaming, because there was no one in the house when I said it. There was no one who could have heard. Unless the house itself was part of the arrangement, unless my Gran's house, that I'd inherited so easily that nobody else in the family had wanted, had been listening to my Gran for 60 years and was simply carrying on. I looked, of course. I went over every room. I'm not going to pretend I found a neat answer, Because I didn't. I found some old wiring in the walls that an electrician later told me was unusual for a house this age and couldn't fully explain, running to rooms it had no business running to. I found that the loft had been floored and used recently, though I'd never been up there and had no reason to think anyone else had. I found, in the loft, a chair. One chair, facing a small gap in the eaves that looked directly down over the village green, positioned so that whoever sat in it could see who came and went. And there was a cushion on the chair, and the cushion held the shape of someone who sat there often. And it was not a shape I had made, because I had never been up there, and I lived alone. I didn't stay much longer after the loft, but I want to tell you how it ended, because the ending is the part that I think about, the part that made me finally understand my gran. I told the chairwoman I was thinking of selling, testing again, I suppose, or maybe I really meant it, and she took my hands, both of them, very kind, very gentle, and she said, "Oh, we'd hate to lose you. But you should know, dear, it's very hard to sell out here. People come and look, and then they don't come back. We do like to keep our own." And she smiled, and she meant it warmly, and it was the most frightening sentence anyone has ever said to me, because I finally heard what it actually was. It wasn't a threat, it was a description. The village didn't need to stop me leaving. The village had already made sure that no one who came to view would ever feel welcome enough to take my place. I'm still there. That's the thing people find hard to understand. I'm still in my gran's house, and I wave at the neighbors, and I take the eggs from the farm shop woman, and I've stopped opening the curtains, and I've stopped saying anything out loud that I don't want repeated back to me. And after a while, and this is what scares me most of all, after a while it stops feeling strange. You start to find it comforting. You start to think, well, at least someone would notice if something happened to me. At least somebody's watching, and I understand now why my gran never warned me. It's not that she couldn't. It's that after 60 years she couldn't remember anymore that it was strange. And I've been here 2 years, and I'm starting to forget too. And the only reason I'm telling you any of this, the only reason I got it out while I still can, is that I want a record of the version of me that still knew there was something wrong, because I don't think that version of me has very much time left. And if you live somewhere with a lot of people, and a lot of noise, and a lot of strangers who don't know your name, I need you to understand that you should be grateful, tonight, for every single one of them, for the anonymity, for the not being watched. Go and look out of your window at all those people who couldn't pick you out of a crowd. That's not loneliness. That's the last privacy you've got, and you don't know what it's worth until you live somewhere that's decided, quietly and warmly and forever, to keep an eye on its own.